Hello there, Reject Nation. I'm Greg Alba.
I'm John Humphrey.
I'm Jason Dolan.
Jason Dolan is joining us today. He is a really close friend of ours. He's actually our patron, too, who bought us this camera right here that we were filming off of. That's how easy it is to get on this channel. Just buy us cameras, recording equipment, film equipment. It's the quickest way to get to Greg's heart. Just buy him stuff. Thanks, Jason. You know me well.
I have credit cards.
Jason is also a
Still paying for this.
Active working screenwriter. He saw Brightburn last night. We saw it a couple nights ago. It's the biggest movie in America right now. I believe it's opened up to like above number one.
$600 million
Crazy.
weekend.
No one's highest R-rated
Will
opening
Smith
weekend.
is seeing this movie. I mean,
Will Smith
His
said,
vlog this week
"I'm
is
watching
all
it."
about Brightburn.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'll give some quick thoughts on it in case you haven't seen it, to give you enough time for like a quick non-spoiler review, and then we'll just hop right into everything. John, why don't you kick us off? What are your thoughts?
I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. I mean, I do agree with some of the gripes that it could be a better deconstruction of superhero movies. It could be a more dramatic family story of some kind. But for what I wanted and for kind of the mood I had going in, I thought it was really tight, really straightforward, really effective. And the concept is enough to take it pretty far. So yeah, I had a great time.
For myself, I really enjoyed how the film was kind of a metaphor for like what happens when you're two parents and you have this kid doing all of these atrocities, maybe a disturbed child. It was really great how they put it in the world of Superman, of like these parents, like specifically the mother, Elizabeth Banks, always in denial about how awful her kid is and all of these things that he's doing and defending him, even against the husband, you know, who's trying to be practical about it. And to me, that's what I really loved about Brightburn, that it was more than a superhero horror film, but it actually, I think, dealt with some very real issues under the guise of superhero horror film.
I don't know what this whole superhero horror thing is that's going around, because I never expected superhero element infused in this at all. I thought the movie was just fine, honestly. Before we talked about this, you told me kind of what you were expecting. You told me kind of what your expectations were at. And I feel like my expectations were a little bit higher than both of yours. I thought the first trailer for this movie was more effective than the entirety of this film. Even though it's a low budget film, if it wasn't some big Sony Pictures advertised production and, you know, didn't have all this like crazy marketing to go behind it, I probably wouldn't have expected as much. I probably would have been able to just accept this as, hey, it's a really good like B-movie horror slasher flick with a superhero twist to it of possessed child. If I just stumbled on it on Netflix or something.
Snuck up on you.
Yeah.
But your expectations, you had built it up to maybe be, you know.
Yeah, because I couldn't help but watch this movie and think of how this could have been not just fine or, you know, passable horror film to something that's actually great. I felt like this could have been a great, very emotionally effective film if they had done a little bit more with it. That's the end of the non-spoiler talk.
Here we go.
All I got to do is just now hop into the rest of this.
Airplanes.
Because you know how in the first trailer, they did a really good job at making you go, this looks like a Man of Steel ripoff. And then as it progressed, you're like, oh, wait a minute. This is looking a little bit twisted. This is looking,
They're perverting Man
this
of
is-
Steel.
This is what if Superman went crazy.
Yes.
You know, I thought this movie could have actually benefited a lot from having more of that approach. I think all the concepts are there, the premise is there, but I felt that this was a very rushed movie. It seemed like it was in a rush to get to like, let's just make him evil right away, instead of having like a natural build up to it. I've heard quite a few reviews on this, and it seems like everyone's kind of giving their own pitch on what would have made this better. For me, when I was watching this, I kept thinking, you know, if they just spent Act 1 building a sense of wonder to the powers, you know, just like kind of committing to a Man of Steel ripoff,
Yes.
a Superman story ripoff, you slowly start to let like, oh, it's going from wonder and slowly descending. Really spend time to feel the town of Brightburn. Really spend time to feel the characters. Other than Elizabeth Banks, and who plays the dad again?
David Denman.
He's great.
From The Office.
Both of the, yeah, Roy from The Office. I think they're both great in this movie. I think the performers are better than the writing in this movie. I do think this film is shot really well. There's some really cool visuals. Some of my favorite shots are actually just when they're driving down the dark road and the way you're feeling the environment of the woods. Like there's some beautiful imagery in here.
Well, when she gets cut in the eye and how half the screen is red, you know,
Yeah.
there was a lot of really fun little ideas that were injected in this film.
See, I feel like that's pretty much how I feel about the movie. Like, yeah, it's fun.
Yep.
It's entertaining, but for just a straightforward horror movie, I didn't find it necessarily scary. I just felt like it could have kept diving deeper and deeper.
Well, I'll just say for myself, I kind of equated to this a little bit to like the first Mad Max, a very low budget Australian police cop, whose wife is killed and just kind of goes after these guys. It created this world that we were able to build on with The Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome and eventually Fury Road. I look at Brightburn as having the potential to spawn, a much bigger world. And that's what I really, really loved, especially with the Michael Rooker character at the very end, which was the better version of what Zack Snyder tried to do in Batman versus Superman. It just saying that there were more people like this possibly out there. Being like a low budget film, my expectations are always going in are a little lower, and so I was really impressed with what they were able to accomplish. I mean, the way that Brandon takes out David Denman, I've wanted to see that my whole life, and I thought it was incredibly well shot. And Matt Jones from Breaking Bad, I was just blown away by the makeup effects and the reality of that situation. And I do know that they cut some scenes, as often happens, that maybe would have built up those relationships and characters a little bit more. And I'm actually really would be interested in seeing that on the DVD or the digital download. Overall, I thought that Elizabeth Banks really did an incredible job as the mother. The kid, I forget his name, who was Ant-Man in Endgame, right?
Jackson A. Dunn, the actor. Yeah.
He was really good. Like, I really liked that guy a lot.
I was pleasantly surprised.
For possessed child actor, that kind of performance just kind of annoys me. I was actually not annoyed by him. There's writing issues I had with it. Though.
Yeah.
He has that scene where he says, "I want to do good." Like, where the hell is this in the movie? Where's that coming from exactly?
I felt like he was mocking her by saying that. Like, that's the only way it made any sense to me.
A child's idea of what's good also.
You're talking about, I'm just going to call him Roy.
Roy.
You're talking about Roy's death. It was about halfway through this movie when I actually started to give a shit about characters. After the boy comes home and he makes up this whole lie about being bullied at soccer, that's when I started, the movie was like, oh, I'm starting to feel something finally for this movie, because it seems like it was in a rush to become this slasher flick, when I felt like it could have been a good character piece and really getting to know the characters as opposed to just setting up people with a few notes to make so we can kill them off in some cool ways and some gory ways, which are all fun in the moment. But in that moment, right, I had a hard time getting on board with when he shot his kid. As cool as the death was, as cool as it was to be like, oh, we finally got to see that Superman power really come full use and how deadly it can be. First off, he kind of just seemed like he made a big leap into, I got to kill this kid. There's a lack of inner conflict for me of, he's raised this kid as his own son for 10 years. It's only very recently when he started to show signs. I felt like there should have been more complexity to, okay, he's an alien, he's got these powers, clearly, but he's also my son. And I felt like that whole thing about he's also my son just started getting really pushed down way too fast. And I felt like when he shoots his kid, he probably should have gotten a little bit more evidence before you're going to finally conclude, I'm going to try to shoot this kid in the head, who he also believes has never bled once in his life.
Exactly.
Like, wait a minute, there's so much lack of logic here and not enough emotional depth.
This guy was not planning it out.
He wasn't. There was just like no thought to it, When you get to the moment with Elizabeth Banks' death in this movie, when that happened, I went, oh, neat. She's dead. I'm actually really cool the movie went that way.
I loved that.
In concept, I really like it. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel that if the movie had done a better job with really making you emotionally invested in characters as opposed to just being a fun, entertaining film, I would have been heartbroken as opposed to just going, neat choice.
Right.
Like you were talking about how this movie really impressed you with the potential it has to go on as a franchise. And that's sort of my takeaway with this is I felt so much potential, but it never quite met it there. I felt like they actually played it rather safe. They could have gone a lot deeper. I think an extra 30 minutes could have really helped this feel better. Weirdly, I kept thinking of the movie Disturbia when I was watching this, because you know how the first two trailers for Brightburn pretty much ruined the whole movie for you. They do, except for Elizabeth Banks dying and the detail.
There was a couple of
gonna die.
I actually felt like there was maybe I started avoiding the trailers. By the time I saw the movie, I felt there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know was going to happen. It's funny that you say that.
Well, there are a lot of there are a lot of tonal layers you don't expect from the trailer. Like, there are a lot of things that are unsettling about it, especially like when he's trying to talk to the little girl in her room. Like, things like that, I was like, this is a whole flavor I did not expect to have to grapple with in this movie.
See, that element right there in terms of writing. Honestly, that whole thing made me so uncomfortable in the right ways. It started making me think all these things of like, oh my God, did Sony Pictures, like, are they going to allow this kid to just flat out sexually assault this like other girl in this movie? movie? Like, would they allow that? Would the parents of these actors allow? Like, my mind was just going there. He says, like, okay, I'll get rid of your mom because she seems to be the obstacle, but then never comes back in the movie. There's no payoff to it. It just sort of gets dropped. And there was so much setup and investment for that to be something in the film, but it just gets canned. For a horror movie where there's a lot of jump scares, lots of cool, like, visual light tricks with, hey, the kid's there, the kid's not there, the kid's there, the kid's not there. I was never really scared, and the part that I was most unsettled by was the possibility of what could happen with these two kids, yet nothing ever became of it in the movie.
Again, I think there was like some scenes that did get cut from the film, but for me, I was scared while I was watching this film because I didn't know what was going to happen next and what this kid was going to do. Like, I knew what was going to happen in the diner because that had been shown to us in the trailer. I knew that something was going to happen with Badger, and that was it, though. I didn't really know, like, if he was going to kill this girl or not. Like, I didn't know if he was going to kill his mom. I didn't know if he was going to kill his dad. Even the aunt, that was one where I was like, not really quite sure what happened at the end of that. But overall, it still worked for me in concept. And a lot of these films, which again are low budget, knowing how a lot of movies get made, also having seen a lot of terrible horror films, I thought this movie did have a lot of heart behind it in what it was trying to convey as this metaphor for two parents with a child that they don't know what to do with. Like, you know, we can talk about Kevin.
Oh yeah, we need to talk about
Elephant. A lot of these films, like, it really was making my imagination go in a direction that I wasn't expecting it to go. I was getting more out of this film than superhero horror film. Like, I was getting parents not knowing how to deal with their kids and hiding their child. Like, you think about Kevin Costner in Man of Steel, they're hiding it, you know, but for the right reasons, you know, and these parents are hiding it for the wrong reasons. That's just something that connected with me that I did not expect going into this film. So I loved, I really did. I loved this movie coming out of it. But I think a lot of it does come down to expectations. I always, for films like this, I have low expectations.
I feel like you had low expectations and it was better than what you thought it would be.
Exactly. And you had high expectations and it didn't meet, it didn't live up to the way that you wanted, that you would have written the movie or would have wanted to do the movie, which I think happens a lot in popular entertainment.
I feel like that can be unfair sometimes to apply to a movie. I did have a hard time letting go of how I loved how the trailer sold me on this sense of wonder and a family vibe that I thought would slowly start to go wrong. The reason I compared Disturbia earlier, Disturbia trailers show you the whole movie. Yeah, they show you he goes under house arrest. There's going to be serial killer who's across the street.
Rear window.
They show you all. Yeah, they show you all the thrills. But when you watch the actual movie of Disturbia, there's none of that for like a whole hour.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like you're hanging out with Shia LaBeouf. You're hanging out with these kids. You're really invested. So when all the stuff that's in the trailer already starts happening, it's still very intense.
Yeah.
And for me, this was the opposite because it kind of just seemed to have this one note and very early on, like, this is a horror movie. Kid's going to go evil very early on. There's really not going to be much of a build up to it. He's just going to switch one day. And I even thought the switch was a little cheesy when he starts reading the notes. Take the world. Nice guy. I was expecting something that was a little bit higher than B-movie horror slasher film. That's because to me, I'm like, other than the fact that he has superhero, like Superman powers, it's pretty much a generic, possessed child movie to me.
Yeah, like The Omen and things like that. I mean, one place I'll agree with you, it's like I would have loved another 20 minutes in this movie.
In the first act, I think.
It's really about 80 minutes long. It's a short film, 90 minutes with credits. Once we got past the first clunky 10 to 15 minutes of the film, I did get on board for the ride. Like, I was ultimately, like, I was almost able to fill in the blanks in my own imagination. The visual effects for this movie, for only $6 million, I thought were very impressive.
Yeah, it's made for cheap, but it doesn't look cheap.
Yeah, it does not look cheap at all.
They really smartly shot their effects because I noticed in a lot of scenes they would have the CG stuff be either out of focus or in motion blur, and then it would lead into a practical gag. And for a low budget, like, you see a lot of low budget movies with a lot of effects.
Yeah. And don't live up to it.
Yeah, and this movie arguably really needs them to, and I thought they very cleverly handled that aspect especially.
Mike Dallator, the DP, he did a fantastic job, I think, of the way that he shot this film.
Well, the way it's shot is one of the best things about this movie.
That's what, it's visually.
I feel like the way it's shot and the parents' performances are like the saving grace of this film.
Absolutely.
And I will say, in terms of writing, usually in these movies, I feel like the parents are really stupid, and I just can't get on board with the parents. In this movie, I liked how early on Elizabeth Banks was very suspicious, and she was going, do I need to take him to see a specialist? I thought there were some well-justified things about why they don't think he needs to go see a specialist, and some of the debates I was really buying into. Their saving graces in this movie that allow me to never be bored. I just couldn't help but feel that there was so much more they could have gone with it.
Yeah, I mean, I went into this movie basically expecting a pretty straightforward exploitation high concept horror movie. The overall impression it left on me is, like based on that and knowing it was going to be kind of a quick movie, or at least a tightly paced movie, I found myself pretty much enjoying the whole thing for how compact some of the elements are. I understand the criticisms, but I thought I got at least shades of all of the criticisms. It's like the beginning of the movie, we spend a little time getting to know the kid, and I never expect the thing is, this movie gave me more than I expected in terms of what it wanted to think about. Not that it got super deep, but the performances of the parents and the relationship dynamic feels lived in enough that you're like, okay, this is kind of like a troubled child situation, and it was enough for, again, my expectation that it did endear me to the movie, and it got under my skin more than I thought, to the point that this is a concept that, for me, I feel like everybody has a concept or two that naturally scares them. And so, like, evil child is just a generally jarring thing to me. Most of what freaks me out in horror is like human grounded stuff, not usually the fantasy. So this is a fantasy that does freak me out, because not only is there a communication gap between an adult and a child, but there's also this accelerated aggression angle that you can't reason with, and there's nothing you can do about. And so I thought it was nifty and tight and effective. I agree with a lot of the criticisms, but for my own personal enjoyment, I thought it was conscientious for how straightforward it was, and a pretty effective B-exploitation movie with a little more to it than I would have expected, basically.
Great counter programming for Aladdin.
I guess I just have a hard time feeling like this. It's tight when it felt very rushed. You know what I mean? It seems like you love it. John liked it more than he thought, and I was like, I'm pretty let down.
Yeah.
So we have like three varieties of opinions here. I just felt like it could have used some better character development, especially, and I feel like with the kid, they could have done something like that too, because I feel like that was one of the appealing parts of it. There's Elseworld stories of Superman going to the dark side, and those are very fascinating. Part of the fascination comes with that is because he can do good, but he decides to do evil. And in here, I'm just like, this kid just decides to be evil.
Similar to Chronicle. Chronicle was a really great version. That was the great bound version. Versions
Dan DeHaan
played it. Would you be looking forward to a sequel to Brightburn, of seeing more in this universe, of maybe the studio giving them a little bit more money, $15 million, to really try and take this character and explore it, or
another character,
or
they set up a bunch.
I want to see more of that Michael Rook or Alex Jones character at the end of the movie. That's all I came away with.
I'm not sure it's made its money back probably by now.
I think 100%. Yeah.
So if there was, I'd go see it.
Yes.
Anyway, guys, did you see Brightburn? What'd you think of it? Comment below. Let us know what you think. If you liked this video, please hit that like button. And before I wrap this up, I would like to give a patron of the day shout out to a man named Scuba Steve. Huge horror enthusiast. He's also a guy who graffitis a lot, very illegal stuff. In a lot of ways, he is like the kid in Brightburn, for a man who could do a lot of good with his art, but instead does a lot of crime. And you know what, man? We got to find this guy and get him arrested as soon as possible.
APB.
What is this? A movement?
All Points Bulletin.
Oh. Yeah, that's what the police. That's what the police put out when they're looking for people. Review that handbook before you join the force. G.
Scuba, thanks for being here for so long, dude. We haven't talked in a while, but you've kept your credit card on file, and that's all that counts. Like I said, full circle this review.
That's right.
Money makes Greg happy.